I work the evening shift at a hospital that is believed to be, at least by 90% of the staff, haunted. I'm part of the 90%. You see, there have been horror stories about every building, floor, and pretty much every part of the campus. I mostly wander around alone as a housekeeper, and that makes it much worse. At least when my mind is on it. Usually I try not to think about it. My personal experience was back in the ultrasound wing of the radiology clinic. By the time I get around to that area, the lights automatically dim, and there isn't anything I can do about it. It's always spooky back there at night, so I usually just get done with what I need to do and move on. The place is kind of shaped like a J, like a long hallway that curves around. On the inner side of the curve, there's a dressing room that opens up to a mammography suite, and then opens again at the top of the J. If you're standing at the bottom of the J, you can see through the doors of both rooms to the top of the J. I was standing back there, trying to bag on my cart, when something moved in the corner of my eye. I looked up, and through the dressing and mammo rooms, to the other doorway opposite me. I vividly remember it like it was yesterday. A male figure walks past the door right before my eyes. I literally watched it amble slowly across my field of vision. There are no male ultrasound techs here, and it was not my boss. It looked like it was wearing dark clothing, had long hair, but was definitely male. I snapped out of it and ran over to see if some freak had wandered in, but there wasn't anyone. I grabbed my stuff and ran out without finishing all the work, 'cause screw that. Another story, which isn't my personal experience, comes from the second floor of the hospital. The second floor has nothing but offices and computer labs, all adjacent to one corridor that spans the entire length of the building. On one end is a set of elevators, and on the other, a pair of double doors that opens into a computer lab. This floor is infamous for being the domain of something the workers affectionately call Matilda. The first story I heard about her was from a co-worker who knew someone who worked on that floor. He came in for whatever reason doing office stuff and was going home late one night. He walks out of the office and starts towards the elevators when something catches his eye, so he turned towards the computer lab. At the end of the hallway, there was what looked like a patient peeking into the lab. He walks towards her and asks her who she is and what floor she came from. She turns around, and she has no face. The office guy is frozen in place, scared out of his mind. He wants to run away, but he doesn't want to turn his attention away from whoever or whatever is staring him down at the other end of the hall. What does he do instead? He closes his eyes as tight as he can, and after several seconds or minutes or however long it was, he opens them, and she's gone. He says he's never ran as fast in his life as he did that night, straight outside without ever looking back. Another Matilda happening was when one of the managers left a tape recorder going in his office, also on the second floor, because he wanted to see if he could catch any weird noises or voices. The next day I'm walking by his office with a co-worker, and he calls us in there and plays the recording to see if we hear it. After forever with nothing, a faint voice comes in and says, "Turn it off." That was spooky as hell. I've got another story. I'm in the MRI suite right now where my friend, Sandra, told me she had a scary experience. Like the ultrasound area, MRI can sometimes give off a creepy vibe. I've never seen anything back here personally, but Sandra has. She told me about a time where she had come in late one night to prep the MRI. The suite is shaped like a W, with the middle wedge representing the computer workstation, and the outer ones being the MRI rooms themselves. On opposite sides of the workstation, there are windows looking into the rooms, and you can see the reflection of the window behind you in the one in front of you. She was back here alone that night, prepping the machine and half asleep. It began to dawn on her that something felt wrong, and she began to experience a feeling of dread. Whatever it was made her feel so uncomfortable and restless that she snapped out of it and woke up. She looks up into the window, into the suite, and sees a silhouette of a figure standing in the corner. She doesn't know what the hell it is. Thinking, she sees things, but remembers how I said you can see the reflection of one window in that other? She realizes that the figure isn't standing in the corner of that room, but is rather standing in front of the other window behind her, just staring at her.
I've lived and worked here in Portland, Maine, and every spring we get biblical levels of rain. It's a huge pain in the butt, but it's something you just learn to live with after a while. You invest in a good umbrella and a waterproof coat and just muddle on like a good Mainer does. Although if some of you Californians saw the kind of weather we endure, you'd be more than likely to call us maniacs as opposed to Mainers. As I said, for the most part, the rain is nothing but a minor irritation, a price we pay for the magnificent falls that are enjoyed by leaf peepers from all over the country. But as I found out one dark and rainy night, the climate in this area of the country can sometimes make it straight up dangerous to live here. So picture the scene. It's raining cats and dogs. I'm walking back to the apartment in an older part of town, and it's full dark. One of the streets on my regular route has been around since the early 1800s and is still lined with cobblestones, while the sidewalks are these big, flat, slate-like slabs that can get super slippery in the spring and fall. I'm pretty sure it's because of a special kind of algae or moss that grows on them, making them really slimy, but I'm not a biologist, so don't quote me on that. All I know is it can be like a freaking ice rink at certain times of the year, but on one occasion it was more of a death trap than an ice rink. I'd already gotten an idea of how slippery it was as I was walking, but as I got a text that I assumed was from my boss, hopefully regarding the raise I've been probing for, the light from my phone must have thrown my vision off and, in turn, my footing. Because one minute I'm just walking along minding my own business, and then next, I'm lying on the sidewalk with the wind knocked out of me, as the ground beneath me just up and disappeared or something. The first thought that registers through my brain is all sorts of expletives that I can't repeat here, and as I try to find my feet again. Only I can't. My left foot just doesn't seem to do what I want it to, and when I look, it's flopping around in this way that makes my stomach churn. That's when the pain starts to throb through my leg, and in seconds, it's like my entire body is just racked with agony. Every time I move, this shooting pain just zaps up my calf and thigh, and I begin to realize I've suffered either a serious break or a very serious sprain. Any other time, I'd have just called 911 there and then, but my phone must have slipped out of my hands as I fell, and when I looked around for it, it was nowhere to be seen. I started thinking it might have slipped off the sidewalk or something, but right as I'm about to look, something else grabs my attention. A sewer drain, just off the sidewalk. One of those metal grid kinds, not a culvert, and it hits me that my phone might have actually clattered down into the sewer as I fell. It was a horrendous stroke of misfortune, but I figured it couldn't be long until a passerby stumbled across me so I could get the help I needed. But as I'm looking around, getting increasingly soaked by the relentless New England deluge, I realize there's not a soul on the streets. You get accustomed to Maine rain, that's a given, but you still avoid going out in the worst of it. It occurs to me that if I'm actually wanting any help, I might actually have to call out for it, or even scream for it. So there I was, forced to actually scream for help, and as weird and prudish as it sounds, I don't know what was worse, the pain, or the sheer embarrassment that I'd fallen and couldn't get up. I give 3 solid blasts of "Can anyone hear me? Help, I'm hurt real bad," but no one seems to respond. Like I can see lights on in windows of apartment buildings mere yards away, so I knew, well, people could hear me. They just chose not to help. It was pretty crushing thinking that people actually knew I was there, but didn't lift a freaking finger to help. But I guess that's life in big cities these days. People are terrible. Assume everything is fake or a scam or whatever. It is what it is. Anyways, a few minutes go by and it slowly becomes apparent that no one is coming to help, and that if I want to actually make any progress in getting to the emergency room, I might actually have to drag myself along the wet sidewalk until I find someone compassionate enough to actually help me. But just before I'm forced to undergo such an indignity, I suddenly see the silhouette of a person appear in a streetlight, and I start calling out to my shadowy potential savior. Now, you'd think if you saw a girl lying in the street calling out for help with obvious pain in her voice, you'd at least change your pace to get over to her a little faster. But this guy seems to notice me, stop for a second, and then just carried on walking over to me at the same speed, without saying a word. It was a weird feeling having that overwhelming relief turn into absolute dread in just a few moments. The person approaching me wasn't giving off any of the compassionate, helpful vibes that I expected. In fact, they were giving off quite the opposite. They didn't say a thing in response when I was all like, Sir, I think I've broken my ankle. Can you please call 911? Just stayed completely silent. Seconds later, I'm looking up at this guy, rain splashing my eyes, and with his hood up, I can barely make out any of his facial features. What happened to you? He asked, seemingly barely concerned at all. It was also like he hadn't been paying any attention at all when I actually told him what the issue was. Like, at the risk of sounding ungrateful, I totally spelled it out for this guy, and to have him reply with, "Huh? What?" was as frustrating as it was unnerving. I tell him all over again, but skip the backstory in favor of just begging him to call 911. He barely moves, or rather, he made 0 attempts to get his cell phone out to make the call. Instead, he just towers over me, silently staring at me like I was some kind of animal curiosity. I dropped my phone. Can you see it anywhere? I remember asking him. At that moment, he did actually start looking around for it, which momentarily restored a little of my hope that he actually wanted to help. But in hindsight, I don't think he'd have handed it over if he'd found it. Because his next move, one which I mistook for him trying to help me up, was to basically start patting me down for valuables before he just went and grabbed my purse off me. I was stunned to silence as he rifled through its contents, helping himself to a few loose bills. I couldn't believe anyone could be so callous, even in a big city like Portland. I was disappointed, angry, and in pain, but I wasn't outright scared until the guy took out my photo ID that I use for work, stared at it for a moment, and then slid it into his pocket. Because that's when I realized that he wasn't doing this just for monetary gain. He wasn't so much of a thief or an opportunist as he was an outright predator. And the thought of what he was going to do next completely terrified me. He didn't walk away with the money and my ID. He just carried on standing over me, staring, probably delighted at how helpless I was, how he could do whatever he liked to me, and there wasn't a soul around to stop him. A 38-year-old woman, and I felt like crying, like a little girl. I begged him not to hurt me, to just leave with the money he'd taken. I think he just got off on that, but what else was there to do? I was in no position to fight back. Best I could hope for was to hit him with my keys if he tried to, take things further. Then right as I'm reaching for them, lying there, discarded on the sidewalk, I hear one of the sweetest sounds I'd ever heard in my life.
Excuse me, is everything all right?
It was a guy's voice, polite but aggressive, accusatory. Someone had finally emerged from one of the nearby apartment buildings, and at that, the hooded guy starts walking off, just as chill as ever.
Hey, I'm talking to you.
The guy says before looking back at me, then calling back inside for, I'm guessing, his wife and someone to call the cops. He then rushes out to ask if I'm okay, which triggers the biggest wave of ugly crying as I just point to my messed up ankle in between shakes of my head. Cut to a few hours later, I'm laid up in the hospital with a broken ankle, high as a kite on the best stuff the Blue Cross can buy. I gave a statement to the cops, had a little cry with my mom when she came to visit, then went about informing all my coworkers that I wouldn't be seeing them for a few months. I got some small amount of closure when I heard the guy was arrested for petty theft. Apparently he had a history of drug addiction and mental illness, and had committed a handful of opportunistic robberies over the last few years. As a result, this last strike was going to send him back to jail for a few years. Something I take a great deal of comfort in.
A little background on me.
I'm a 19-year-old male and I was traveling with my girlfriend. We were on a road trip to visit my grandparents who lived a few states away. They said we could stay at their place for a few weeks over the summer, and it seemed like a no-brainer because they lived on the beach. The path to getting there, though, was really long, and it was a painful drive. My girlfriend and I both disliked driving, but we figured that we could take turns and it wouldn't be so miserable. I think the total time on the road was about 10 hours. We were about 5 hours into the drive when we decided to stop off at a rest stop. I'm not going to lie to you. We stopped quite a bit. I'm a little compulsive with drinking water because I like to stay hydrated. As you might imagine, there are some consequences of being hydrated. It irritated my girlfriend, but not very much. I think she secretly liked that we were stopping on my sake and not hers, because she always seemed to buy something every time we stopped. This one rest area was not horrible or anything. It wasn't in a bad area or anything like that. It seemed like a very typical, safe rest stop. But this is where one of the most horrifying experiences of my life took place, at least the first part of it. This has simply been one of the many times when I had to pull off the road to go pee. When I saw that there was also a McDonald's near this one rest area, I decided to wait until we got there. I normally don't eat McDonald's, but I let myself do it on special occasions like road trips. It makes the drive go by a little better, even if it makes my stomach feel like garbage. So, I went to the bathroom and she bought more cigarettes. We had already made our way to the McDonald's when we had our first appearance with Creepy Guy. We actually did talk to him a little bit. Let's call him Joe. Joe may have been the strangest looking man I'd ever laid my eyes on. He looked like he didn't come from this country or something. And not on a racial basis or anything, he just looks like he had a completely different lifestyle, as if he lived off the land and had never used electricity. His beard went all the way down to his stomach, and if you looked at it for long enough, you could see food particles in there, and some of them not even from a meal that he had eaten that day. So that should give you a good idea of his level of cleanliness. The rest of his outfit followed suit. A dark pair of jeans that look like they hadn't been washed in a decade, and a large leather jacket that looks like the oldest thing I've ever seen in my life. I'm sure it actually wasn't that old, but it had a timely appearance to it due to it being in such poor condition. Anyway, we spoke to Joe because he awkwardly sat next to us at McDonald's. I thought this was extremely strange, and it definitely weirded me out. I'm an introvert by nature, and talking to people is extremely taxing. My girlfriend is an extrovert and always attracted people that were interested in conversation. I just found it strange because I've never had someone randomly sit at the same table as me when they were complete strangers. I figured that it was because my girlfriend attracted talkers, but looking back, it was probably because we appeared to be easy targets. Joe sat down right next to my girlfriend and started asking us where we were going. My girlfriend, being the optimistic and unsuspecting person that she is, gave him the entire story, that we were basically 5 hours away from anyone that we knew in any direction. I tried to give her a look that she needed to shut up, but she didn't get the hint. We had already ordered our food and we were eating when he sat down. He didn't order anything. He just invited himself to our table and talked to us for the entire time we were there. At first he was rather polite, but had a really thick accent that didn't seem like it belonged anywhere. I couldn't tell you where the accent came from because I've never heard anything like it in my life. And this is coming from someone who knows plenty of people from the North, Midwest, the South, Australia, and anywhere else. This accent just didn't seem like it came from Earth. After a painful experience of trying to get away from Joe, we got back in our car and started up on that journey again. As we got to our car, I also noticed that Joe had gotten into his car as well. As we had pulled out, Joe was a good distance away from us. I thought this was extremely strange, and the warning sign in my head went from flashing to high alert. I knew that we were in some kind of danger. I was driving and I tried putting the pedal to the metal. The next half hour or so, I had probably sped more than I did my entire life. I was normally a really safe driver, but this guy was really freaking me out. I tried telling my girlfriend that this guy was tailing us, but she didn't believe me. She thought I was just being paranoid. But what are the odds of seeing this guy at a gas station and then him being behind us for 30 minutes after we got on the road? She told me to pull over at the next rest stop and we would know for sure if he was trying to do us harm. Stupidly, that's exactly what I did. And my worst suspicion was true. He pulls off at the same rest stop and parked right next to us. My adrenaline was rushing as I got ready to fight this guy. I didn't know what else I could do. I told my girlfriend to call the police and then I got out of the car. He was easily a foot taller than me, and he was a little older and probably not in the best shape. I had the benefit of being an athlete wannabe at my college. I did all the intramural sports stuff like that, so I was in pretty decent shape, but none of that mattered when Joe pulled out a knife. The understanding that he was out to do us harm and I was going to have to fight him. I waited for him to approach. About 30 seconds went by before he started walking in my direction. My heart was pounding. I started screaming every insult that I could. I called him a degenerate and an old man who was in way over his head, and then I was about to whoop him. It didn't scare him, though, and when he got within 10 feet of me, I thought it would be a good idea to tackle him. I was hoping to take him by surprise, but I didn't. I tried getting him off of his feet and onto the floor, but when I tackled him, he plunged the knife right into my back. But that was the only good hit he got on me. I managed to get him on the floor, and after that, I started kicking his head ferociously. I don't know how I managed to do it, but he was on the ground seemingly unconscious, and I was standing there. I could feel the blood flowing down my back, and I got back into the back seat of my car and yelled at my girlfriend to drive me to the nearest hospital. I was questioned a few days later at the hospital about what had happened. I guess the police showed up after we had left and found Joe still there unconscious. He was in a coma, and the police didn't know what to think. Once they got mine and my girlfriend's version of the story, they seemed to believe it, and so that was that. I don't know when or if Joe will ever wake up from that coma. And honestly, after he almost killed me, I kinda hope he doesn't. That was an extremely traumatic experience for me and my girlfriend. The good news about the situation is that I can tell people that I put someone in a coma once, and if they don't listen to me, they're next.